Welcome. We will start with sharing the screen. Thanks for coming. We're going to continue our study of meditation and the various types of meditation, one of which leads to enlightenment, which Rabbi Kaplan refers to as Ruach HaKodesh. First, let us take a look at the website. Now, people have asked me, what is the cleanest way to get people they know the Zoom link? And the answer is simply forward them the text or the email that I keep sending you, because that text and email has a link to this website, the website which is the resource room for this class. And this website has a sign-up capability right there. So all they have to do is sign up and input their email, and they'll be on the list. They'll get the Zoom link. It's very easy to do. Plus, when you forward it to them, you can just say, this is what we talked about. I thought you might like this. However you introduce it, get them on the website to learn all about the class, and they'll be excited. They'll say, wow, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and they'll want to come. And it'll be easy for them to sign up. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that you'll notice we have a blog here. It's loading. And on the blog are different articles, including the article that we are now reviewing by Ethan Dorshav, Soul of Fire, A Theory of Biblical Man. So you can print this out, have it handy. You can call it up and open it up as we're conducting the class. So you have the text that we're going over right now at your disposal. So feel free to use it. Okay. Let's now continue with the class. Okay. We're going to continue the study of Enlightenment using the essay by Ethan Dorshav. We're going to continue with part 4, and we'll also discuss how to use counting to avoid distractions when meditating. Now, just to review, how did we get on this track? We got on this track because in Rabbi Kaplan's book, Meditation on the Bible, which is our basic text, he mentions that there are 3 words in the Bible that usually are used to refer to the soul. Nefesh, Ruach, that's actually a misspelling, and Neshama. And according to the Kabbalists, these represent the 3 most important levels of the soul. That's a very interesting statement for 2 reasons. One is it shows how important these 3 dimensions of the soul are, but 2, he's implying that there are other levels, which he hasn't mentioned yet. So I'm not sure if we're going to get into that, but it would be interesting to know exactly how many other levels he thinks there are to the soul. If you recall, we did introduce him as a biblical scholar who's written some really superb scholarly works on Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, and also Yonah. So this guy is a very good scholar. All right, now what have we learned from him so far? In part 1, here's a summary. He told us, as an introduction to this essay, in what follows, I intend to show that the original Hebrew terminology was both distinct and consistent, and that the very absence of visible souls in the Hebrew Bible points to a more commanding alternative conception of man's inner being. So he's basically saying references to the soul and a metaphysical philosophy are all over the place in the Bible. You just have to connect the dots. It's not explicit, which is where a lot of scholars, which is what stopped a lot of scholars. They said, all right, if I can't see it with my own two eyes, it's not there. But he's saying that our approach to understanding is you have to dig a little bit. And he goes on, I also intend to show that while the Bible does not uphold the soul-body dichotomy, which most critics have considered prerequisite to belief in the persistence of the soul after death. It does demonstrate the presence of a four-element structure, both matter and spirit, that supports a belief in life eternal. So he's saying that the whole idea of body and soul going into the body, that's not a Jewish idea. It's not a biblically based idea. I think he referenced the fact that it's a Greek idea, but it's not ours. And we have a much more rich conception where we have four dimensions. And he goes on to say that this structure has been either overlooked or confused with Aristotle's schema. And okay. So scholars searching the Hebrew Bible for signs of an interest in the afterlife have been looking through the wrong intellectual lens. They've been looking for body versus soul. We have a four-dimensional lens. They didn't know which lens to use. To gain access to this metaphysical worldview of the ancient Israelite sages, we must stop looking for a landscape of heaven under the light of our preconceived expectations. So yeah, we need to use the lens that the Bible gives us for understanding it. Okay. So he goes on to part 2 to describe that. The first step in parsing the Hebrew Bible's idea of man is to clarify the text view of the cosmos. Okay. The Hebrew Bible, the cosmic picture is defined by a four-element hierarchical construct. There is an ancient theory of four elements: earth, water, wind, and fire. And we had it before the Greeks. So what's interesting is he's saying that there's a classical Greek definition of the soul and the body, two-dimensional, but he says at least there was one, maybe it was a minority point of view among the Greeks that had four elements: earth, water, wind, and fire. And we had it even before they did. And now, as an aside, I want to share with you that I get different studies and essays from different martial arts groups. And one of them came today talking about four elements: earth, water, wind, and fire, in different fighting styles. So what that is telling us is that they are calling upon an ancient Chinese, because it's traditional martial arts, an ancient Chinese perspective, which had four of these. Now, also as an aside, there's also a Taoist conception of five. They added metal to this, which we're not going to get into. But the point is that even before the ancient peoples, even before the ancient Greeks, the Bible following people had this four-dimensional idea of the soul. They are fire as heaven on top, then a circling wind, below it the green earth, and underneath the primal waters of the abyss called to home. All right, we went over that. What did we learn in part 3? This explains the body-plant analogy employed through the Hebrew Bible. The same word zera denotes both the seed of plants and the seed of man. Likewise, the word for fruits, pri, also describes children, the fruit of the loin, and at least a half dozen other terms employ this parallel usage. What he's telling us is that the connection between the body, the humans, and plants is very well established multiple times throughout Tanakh. Indeed, he says, plant imagery is frequently employed to describe the human physical existence and continuity. He quotes Isaiah. He quotes Ezekiel. He quotes the Psalms. Okay. The body, therefore, is far more than a clay vessel. Man, in some sense, is first of all a plant, itself growing, then wilting with age, and eventually returning to the earth, only to fertilize new growth. We understand that. We understand that when bodies decompose, where do they go? Into the biosphere. Our biosphere element goes back to the biosphere. Even science tells us that. On this level of existence, each and every one of us is a seed of earth, like the flowers and the trees. And the elemental earth principle as a sphere of generation and degeneration explains the puzzling link within the first verse of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, with which we open, a generation goes and a generation comes because the earth stands forever. Our growing body created of earth is our share in this basic organic cycle of reality. So we participate in the ecosystem, that the root of our soul is in the biosphere. Now I'm going to add something which we'll have to get into at some point, because he's forcing us to kind of transcend the idea of there being a difference between the physical and the metaphysical. There's a connectedness there. And one thing that comes to my mind is, you know how they say that energy comes in either particles or waves, depending on how you look at it? That's kind of like, I think, what we're talking about here. From our perspective down here, things are physical, and then beyond that, there's a non-physical or metaphysical. But the way he's describing it, they're all in one continuum. So now the question is, and we're going to answer this today. Now the question is, well, if there's a recycling of our physical part, of our plant part, for which the Bible establishes a very strong connection between us and the biosphere, if there's a certain recycling going on in this level of existence, is there a recycling, so to speak, going on as we get to be less and less physical? That's one of our questions, and we're going to answer that today by going to part 4. So we're going to go now to Ethan. All right, as I mentioned, if you're having trouble seeing this, just listen to me, or as I mentioned, it's on the website. So go to the website and open it, and you'll be able to see it right there. Okay. So we've already established the part of our being that's a plant. So now this is what he says. The second level of our being is that of nephesh, the part of us related to water. Water itself, of course, stands for life. That is why in the Bible, flowing waters are considered alive, mayim chayim. And why Ecclesiastes, the book of Kohelet, chose running streams to signify the element. That nephesh too stands for life, or the flowing life force, is evident in over 60 biblical references. So he's automatically saying that in his research into the text of the Bible and into the text of Tanakh, he has found over 60 times when the word nephesh is related to water, liquid. In ancient Israelite thought, life means animation, the capacity for independent movement, and is therefore a term reserved for animals. Contrary both to Western languages and to the customary scientific usage, the Bible never applies to plants the Hebrew term for life, chai. Likewise, there is no such thing as a dead plant. All right, so life, animation, movement is in the water realm, the nephesh realm. Nephesh, then, is not a uniquely human soul, as some translations imply, but one that humans share with animals from insects to primates. Fitting its appropriate Latin translation, anima, the term captures the layer of creation as defined on its 5th day. God said, let the water bring forth abundantly nephesh creatures that have life in the text. And God created every crawling nephesh that has life. That all animals are possessed of a nephesh too, we also learn from Leviticus. He that kills a human nephesh shall be put to death, and he kills a beast nephesh shall repay it. The Bible tells us the relation of nephesh not only to animal life, but also to life's opposite. Nephesh is the only term used in reference to death. While the body may wither, it is the nephesh itself that dies. As Shimshon, Samson declares, let my nephesh die with the Philistines. When the body stills, life runs out. This is remarkable stuff. So he's telling us that that just as the physical part of us is biological, and we share with that we are a plant in essence, like other plants in the biosphere. He's saying you go a little bit up the ladder of the soul to the nefesh part, the next level where there's water. We share this soul with other creatures that have water in them, which of course is blood. And the evidence he brings are these verses in the Bible that talk about nefesh and who has a nefesh. It's not just people. It's in the text. Okay. How do we know that nefesh is related to water? First of all, he did say in the other paragraph, he found over 60 times in Tanakh where there's a connection between nefesh and water. And he elaborates, first, as mentioned, both connote life. In addition, unlike the other two biblical soul terms, nefesh is always, meaning ruach and neshama, nefesh is always described as liquid. He poured out his nefesh to death, like you pour out liquid. My nefesh leaks away for sorrow, leaks, liquid. Our nefesh dried away like liquid does. I poured out my nefesh before the Lord, pouring out liquid. Again, he's done his research into how words are used in the Bible, and he says the common denominator here is liquid. The prophet Samuel brings the point home, for we all must die, he teaches. Indeed, as water spilt on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again, God does not spare any nefesh. So Samuel is right out connecting nefesh and water. The most important connection between nefesh and the ever-flowing element of water, however, is its association with blood. Alluding to the pumping animated blood flow that runs in our veins and not to chemical blood, Leviticus teaches, for the nefesh of the body is in the blood. Deuteronomy reiterates the same idea, for the blood is the nefesh, poured on earth like water. And Ezekiel famously exclaims, in your blood live. Okay. From a human point of view, and especially in terms of mitzvot and how we handle living things and dead things, and we think of blood. Now, on the other hand, the alleged connection between nefesh and breath has no basis at all in biblical texts and stems solely from superimposing Hindu and perhaps ancient Greek ideas of breath as the all-encompassing force of life upon the Hebrew Bible. Again, this is a guy that looks at text, and what he's declaring is the word nefesh. How is it used? All these times it's used in connection with water/blood especially. However, there's people walking around saying that nefesh means breath. So he's asking, where does the text back that up? And he's saying it doesn't. And he's saying that there's mistranslations of nefesh as breath because of the bias of people who might be familiar with the Hindu perspective or the Greek perspective. But it's not biblical. Okay. Now, finally, the connection between nefesh and water explains the Bible's underworld, Sheol. Few people realize that the biblical Sheol is devoid of fire and brimstone. That's not a Jewish idea. Hell, this whole burn in hell, it's not a Jewish idea. It is not scorching, but cold, and its dwellers do not agonize, but float in sleep. At the bottom of the Bible's cosmic order, Sheol is in fact a dark water world, submerged in the abyss called Tahom, where, quoting, the Rephaim swirl under the waters. When plunged into the sea, Yonah could therefore say, out of the belly of Sheol, I cried. He was underwater. Maybe that's the whole metaphor of that book for him dying and then being brought back. We'll have to get into that at some point. For you cast me into the Tahom. And the same parallel is explicit in Ezekiel. On the day when it went down to Sheol, I caused lamentations. I closed the Tehom over it and held back its rivers, and its many waters were stopped up. So Ezekiel, the prophet, is connecting the idea of Sheol with the water world. Likewise, the waves of death encompassed me. The rivers of perdition assailed me. The pangs of Sheol encompassed me. Still quoting Ezekiel. Hence, the dead descend to the underworld through water wells called the bore. That's a word for well, that reach below the entire plate of the earth. You shall be brought down to Sheol to the farther reaches of the bore. Remarkably, the biblical netherworld has nothing to do with punishment. Each of us, not only sinners, reaches Sheol. Ecclesiastes urges every reader to embrace life because there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you are headed. Likewise, Jacob lamented the presumed loss of Joseph's life by saying, I will go down into Sheol unto my son. Though both were righteous, they were destined for the underworld, the primal collective reservoir of life. So this is what he's saying. He's looking at King Solomon, who wrote Ecclesiastes, definitely a wise man, who's saying, we go down to Sheol. Okay. And he's quoting Jacob and says, well, I'm going to go down to Sheol and maybe I'll see my son Joseph there. So this is not like burn in hell punishment type stuff. It's part of, like you might say, the way things work, the natural order of things, that when we die, the water part of us goes to the water world, which is below the plant world. As Ecclesiastes underscores, it is the nature of water to flow, but just as importantly, it is the nature of water to flow downward. That's why the water stuff is not on top of the plant, it's below it. Thus, our own blood flow, our innate water element, runs down to an underworld after death. And he quotes, let the wicked dry out, let them bleed to Sheol. Sheol makes 65 appearances in the Bible, a third of which make an explicit link to nephesh and blood. No other soul term is ever used in this context. So again, he's done his homework into the text. 65 times the word Sheol appears in Tanakh, and 1/3 of those, it is related to nephesh and blood. And no other soul term, meaning ruach or neshama, is used in this context. When the Bible talks of the earth covering the blood of the dead, it is referring not to a heap of soil, but to the entire earth realm. So just as our material body returns to the earth, dust to dust, our nephesh life force returns to the Tehom, blood to blood. In summary, the animation of nephesh defines a separate level or reality above and beyond the growth of earthbound flora. Together with the ability to carry ourselves from place to place, it represents sensation, cognitive processes, and instinctive drives. For the Bible, rivers are the veins and arteries of the earth, just as our own blood flows in the veins and arteries of our bodies. As water is the natural force of animation that impels all life, so our nephesh tied to water is our personal share in animation and life. So first of all, we had we raised the point before this. Is there a recycling element in the nephesh and dimension of the soul, just as there is a recycling element in the plant-like of the soul? And the answer is yes. He's saying just as there's decomposition of our body when we die, plant going into plant, he's saying there's also a decomposition, although he doesn't use that word, of our blood, which is a liquid, into the liquid realm of Sheol, which is underneath the biosphere. One other point, when he talks about the natural force of animation that impels all of life, And just as our own blood flows in the veins and arteries of our bodies, water is the animating force. You know, what is the purpose of Chinese healing? What is the purpose of acupuncture and acupressure? As we discussed, you get acupuncture or acupressure, you get a poke, and what happens is it creates a slight controlled wound. And what happens? The blood rushes to the wound. And inside the blood, as the Chinese will say, is what they call qi, which I think we call nefesh. And they actually found, there was a rabbi in Tennessee who wrote an essay that said, yes, qi is nefesh. And the nefesh, as the animating healing part, or what the Chinese will call qi, resolves the wound. That's what's going on. There you go. And what Ethan is saying, where the nefesh is the life force carried in the blood, that corresponds to the approach of the Chinese healers. So that's what he's got. That's what he's got. Okay. Let me see if there's anything else we want to add to that one, because that one's a doozy. Okay, we're going to pick up on 5 next bat time, same bat time, same, oh, wait a minute, bat station. I actually, yeah, still recording, good. Okay. Bante. We're going to talk now about meditation and how to deal with distractions using counting to deal with distractions. Counting the breaths as they pass is a highly traditional procedure. Some schools of practice teach this activity as their primary tactic. Vipassana uses it as an auxiliary technique for reestablishing mindfulness and for strengthening concentration. As we discussed earlier, you can count breaths in a number of different ways. Remember to keep your attention on the breath. You will probably notice a change after you have done your counting. The breath slows down or it becomes very light and refined. This is a psychological signal that concentration has become well established. At this point, the breath is usually so light or so fast and gentle that you can't clearly distinguish the inhalation from the exhalation. They seem to blend into each other. You can then count both of them as a single cycle. Continue your counting process, but only up to a count of 5, covering the same 5-breath sequence, then start over. When counting becomes a bother, go on to the next step. Drop the numbers and forget about the concepts of inhalation and exhalation. Just dive right into the pure sensation of breathing. Inhalation blends into exhalation. One breath blends into the next in a never-ending cycle of pure, smooth flow. So he's saying, you're sitting there getting distracted. In, out, 1. In, out, 2, and so on. Stop at 5. See what that does. Don't keep going, because then you get too involved with the counting as opposed to the meditating. So do another count of 5 if you have to. In and out counts as 1 count. In and out counts as 1 count. And you can see, I think you can see that, you know, when people are really upset and they're agitated and they're breathing hard and people say, catch your breath, catch your breath. This helps you catch your breath, literally. And so, especially if you find that you're distracted because you're agitated, let's say, or you're getting a little bit bent out of shape, then you're like, count 1, and then in and out, count 2, and in and out, count 3, in and out, count 4, in and out, count 5, and see what that does for you. Eventually, your breath, you relax, and your breath becomes light, and it slows down, and then you stop counting, and you just breathe. And there you're back where you started from. That's where you wanted to be when you got distracted in the first place. Okay. On that note, we will stop the recording and we will meditate.